So today we are going to be looking at the NLT Study Bible. And there are actually two editions we're going to look at, so this may be a little longer a video. We're going to look at the 2008 text edition, black and white edition, and the 2015 color illustrated edition. Same study Bible, both are still available. This is the newer one, but this is still on the market. And there are some differences that we're going to talk about as we talk about this study Bible overall. The 2008 edition is available in large print, hardback, leather, or bonded leather bindings. The illustrated edition is available in hardback, which is what we have, leather, bonded leather, and a linen-covered hardback slipcase. So like a nice, you slide it in, and pretty nice looking edition. But those are, as of right now, what this one is available in. The 2008 edition is 2,486 pages long. The illustrated edition is 2,567 pages long. So there's nearly 100 pages more of illustrations and photos in this one than there are in this one. Contributors to the NLT Study Bible include Daryl Bach, Tremper Longman, John Oswalt, Grant Osborne, Gary Burge, Victor Hamilton, Andrew Hill, Scott McKnight, Eugene Merrill, Doug Moo, and Mark Strauss. That's a pretty significant list of scholars from across the spectrum. Now, there are a lot of features in both of these editions, so we aren't going to be able to cover them all, but I just want to give you an idea. And what I'm going to do is show you the illustrated edition, and then I'll show you the non-illustrated edition so you can kind of get a feel for the differences. In the illustrated edition, so there's a great timeline, very in-depth, and it's got a ton of information that walks you through where the events in Scripture are happening in relation to other world events, and a lot of photos, color, illustrations, photographs, so you can really see what's going on in not just the world of Scripture, but the world around it. 2008 edition has the same information, but without the illustrations. So you're just getting the timeline material pretty sparsely. There are excellent book introductions at the beginning of each book that are approaching commentary level. Multiple page book introductions that cover all of the typical background questions that people have. The illustrated edition, their color. The 2008 edition, same information, just in black and white. Both editions contain a really good section covering the intertestamental period, multiple pages of not just a timeline, but also the events that took place between the testaments. Again, the only difference is pictures, not so much. After Revelation in the New Testament, there's also a really cool article and timeline about what happened after the apostles, after the age of the early church. So it's not like stuff stopped after the New Testament was written. And it gives a good introduction to the canonization of the New Testament, the post-apostolic church. And in each of the essays in the New Living Translation Study Bible, they give a section called For Further Reading, and it recommends like a handful, not a ton, but a handful of materials on that section. So at the end of each book introduction, it'll say For Further Reading, and they'll give you a link to some really good commentaries on that book that are out there for those who want to follow up and go a little more in depth. After that, there are about 10 pages of Hebrew and Greek word studies. Oh, this is such a good feature. This basically walks you through the importance of these terms that are in the Old Testament or the New Testament, Hebrew and Greek terms, that don't really have specific English translations or one-to-one English equivalents, and it gives you a little bit fuller sense of what the term means. So some terms we may just get so used to hearing that we don't even really stop and think, what does it actually mean? And so this has these many, it's almost like little lexicon entries for each word that have biblical significance in Hebrew and in Greek. To nitpick, they don't actually show the Hebrew text. It's all in English and the same thing. So unlike a couple of study Bibles out there every now and then that will actually show you the Hebrew word or the Greek word, this just gives you the transliteration in English. If you don't know or care about the original languages in terms of reading them yourself, not a big deal. But if you are a Bible nerd, then that's a little disappointing. There's at the end a subject index for all of the notes. So if the notes throughout the Bible address certain subjects and you want to know what does the Bible say about marriage, or lightning, or life, or military practices in the ancient Near East. It's pretty specific. There's a lot about that in here, actually. Then this subject index tells you where to turn in the notes to find that subject talked about. There's also a features index. All of the timelines, personality profiles, theme discussions sprinkled throughout the text. This will tell you where to find those as well. And there's full color photograph on each side in the illustrated edition, not in the 2008 edition. There's also, they've combined the dictionary and concordance, a bridge dictionary and a bridge concordance at the end. And so if there's a term that's actually in the text, not in the notes, but in the biblical text, then it'll give you a quick definition and a couple of the key places where that term appears. Really helpful feature combining concordance and the dictionary. So you not only get to know what the word means, but also where you can find that word in the text. At the back, you have a section of colored maps. In the illustrated edition, you have the same maps. I don't know if you can really see on camera or not, but they've been modernized a little bit. They've been updated in terms of graphic presentation. So the ones in the 2008 edition are more high contrast. They've got these little racing stripe borders around the edges. And the 2015 edition, they're a little more subdued, a little more sleek. No racing stripe. The contrast isn't quite as high, but it's still the same information. So a little bit more sleeker, modern look than the maps in the older version. Now, when we come to Genesis, the NLT Study Bible really shines. I'm going to just use the illustrated edition to show you the notes. All the content is also in the other, just without the pretty pictures. So when I mean pretty pictures, like boom, there's a Hubble telescope image at the beginning of Genesis. Full color, high quality photography, maps, timeline, and then there's an excellent, I say excellent a lot, but I really mean it. There's an excellent presentation of the framework theory of Genesis laid out in the days where they say formless and empty, so God forms and then he fills. We discuss this in Bible for the Rest of Us when we look at the creation account, and in the Disciple Dojo course, The Bible and Science, Friends or Foes. So click this link to the Disciple Dojo video page, and both of those courses, Bible for the Rest of Us and Bible and Science, Friends or Foes, are completely free and available online, and we go into a lot of detail about this framework pattern in particular. That's the overall perspective that the notes in Genesis are operating from, is explaining the text in its ancient Near East setting as the original audience and the people in the ancient world would have understood it. So it doesn't jump into explaining it in light of modern science. It doesn't really get into a lot of young earth or old earth creationist questions. It takes a framework theological approach. That's what you're going to get in the Genesis notes. When we get to Exodus, it's not as good as Genesis, in my opinion. The issues about the Exodus and its historicity and the location of Mount Sinai or the Red Sea crossing or all of those things that root the text in the history of God's people, they're a little more sparse in the NLT Study Bible than in, say, the Archaeological Study Bible that we've looked at before. So, for instance, they do put the crossing of the Red Sea at the Gulf of Suez, unlike some other study Bibles that we've looked at that put it up at these lakes or over in the Gulf of Aqaba. But they really only give one route to Mount Sinai, the traditional location here at the bottom of the Sinai Peninsula, which is a traditional location, but it's certainly not the only location for Mount Sinai. And they do note it with a question mark, so they let you know that it's not exactly certain, but they don't give you all the other theories, which I think for a study Bible of this scale, they should have done. That would have been more helpful for students of Exodus. Now, there is a great full-color spread on the plagues of Exodus and the significance that those plagues had theologically in terms of how each one is aimed at a different Egyptian god in the Egyptian pantheon. And that's really cool. This edition is full color. Again, the 2008 edition has all this same information. It's just in a simplified text-only format. Same information, just without all the cool pictures. There's also a cool overview of Israel's calendar. So when you're reading about the different feast days and holidays and times of year, this helps you get a big picture understanding. This is, again, also in the 2008 edition, just not full page and in color. Now, the 2008 edition does have some diagrams, some illustrations of the ark and the priestly implements, the menorah, the lampstand, things like that. So you do get some illustrations that kind of show you what you're reading in that part of Exodus. But they blew the roof off in the updated edition. Full color, double page illustrations, really good quality, and helps you visually see all of these things that Exodus is concerned with teaching about. Even a photographic reenactment of the tabernacle. So they really upped their visual game in the illustrated edition. When we come to Romans 7, the notes are pretty non-committal in terms of who is speaking. I'll actually read you kind of the only note that even addresses that question that we look at here when we look at different study Bibles and how they handle this famous passage that Christians have been divided over for millennia in their interpretation. The note in Romans 7:18 about the sinful nature, which is Paul talking throughout the chapter about my flesh desires this, or the sinful nature as it's translated in some translations like the NLT. The note says, see note on 619. This phrase could refer to Paul's former state as an unredeemed person, or to a part of Paul that remains tied to the world and resists the will of God. So that's a very, very oversimplified acknowledgement that there are two ways to read Romans 7. It's good that they put that in there. That is a very helpful thing. It just doesn't give you much if you want to go beyond that into theological interpretation, which of course isn't always the job of a study Bible. That's more what you would need to go to a commentary for. But it's helpful that they do acknowledge both views. And in Romans 9, there's really nothing one way or the other on the question of sovereignty, Calvinism, Arminianism, the elect, predestination, all of those things that people kind of go to Romans 9 to back their case up or to deal with it if it's something that they don't believe in. You don't get a lot of discussion about that. Pretty non-committal. Probably reflecting the broad evangelical nature of this Bible, and that the contributors themselves were likely not all on the same page in terms of how they interpret Romans 9 through 11. They do note the different ways that Romans 11 is read in terms of what is the future of all Israel. Who is this all Israel who will be saved? Is it Jews and Gentiles together in the process throughout history? Or is it talking about at the return of Jesus or right before it, there will be this massive incoming of the Jewish people into faith in the Messiah? They don't go too heavy one way or the other on that. There is a cool illustration that talks about Jews and Gentiles and the overall order and imagery that Paul uses of the olive tree, and Gentiles being branches, wild branches that have been grafted into the tree of Israel. So that's a really neat feature in this part, and it helps to give a visual depiction of what Paul is talking about. This information, once again, is in the other version, but not with the full color photography. When we come to Revelation, there's good discussion of the historical background of the seven churches, and they get the background of the Laodicean church right in terms of noting that both hot and cold are good things, and lukewarm is the bad thing. If you don't know what we're talking about, see the video, Bible for the Rest of Us, where we talk about that passage in particular. There's also a good article that explains the significance of the symbolic numbers in Revelation, and Revelation is a heavily symbolic book. You can't just pick it up and start reading and applying it literally. There is apocalyptic symbolism that goes into it, and the study notes and the book introduction explain that well, so that you're not just jumping right in and reading all kinds of crazy stuff into Revelation like a lot of people tend to do. Now, in general, the NLT Study Bible is going to be the opposite of the ESV or the CSB Study Bible in how it treats complementarianism and egalitarianism. The NLT Study Bible does have an egalitarian bias. It leans more egalitarian in those passages where CSB and ESV would lean more complementarian. So for instance, when you come to Ephesians chapter 5, famous passage, wives, submit to your husband, you can get up close here. NLT translation actually breaks the paragraph at verse 22 and makes that a new paragraph, wives, submit to your husband. But the heading, the subject heading in the NLT Study Bible puts verse 21 in this same section. So this is where interesting, the editors of the Study Bible and the translators of the NLT, even though there's a lot of overlap between them in terms of who worked on it, there's a little bit of a tension here, because if you read verse 21 as the beginning of this new thought, verse 21 starts with, submit to one another out of reverence for Christ, and then goes on to give examples of what that looks like. Whereas if you break the paragraph after verse 21, then that whole submit to one another part goes with what came before. And the new focus that Paul is going to talk about now is this wives and husbands role. It's subtle, and if you're not up on the complementarian, egalitarian debate among Christians, you may miss that, but it's an interesting thing to note. And that kind of reflects how the NLT study notes handle passages that have to do with women's roles. So again, you're going to get a little egalitarian bias. They're going to lean that way, similar to how the ESV and the CSB lean complementarian. Not anything overwhelming, not anything heavy-handed, but just worth noting. Where you'll see it most clearly is there's an essay, and this is in 1 Timothy 2. There's an essay in both the illustrated and in the 2008 edition on women's role in the New Testament church. and it does lean in an egalitarian direction, but it also notes the complementarian perspective. So it's pretty balanced overall. And if you are a complementarian and you've only read complementarian interpretations of these passages, then the NLT Study Bible is a really good resource for you to read, so you can see how other Christians who aren't in your tradition read these same passages. It helps prevent that echo chamber mentality that a lot of Christians can fall into when we only read and listen to and study from people who we already agree with. So, would I recommend the NLT Study Bible? Absolutely. Wholeheartedly, I would recommend this. If you like the NLT translation, or if you're newer to the faith, or if your reading level isn't quite up to a New American Standard or an ESV level, because those are written at a higher reading level. The NLT was translated so that late middle school, early high school, and up will be able to understand it. In terms of word for word or thought for thought, the NLT leans to the thought for thought versus the word for word translation approach. And if you don't know what I mean by that, we have a whole video at Bible for the Rest of Us right here, and it talks about the different translations and where this one falls on the spectrum. If you like the NLT translation, then I think either this or the Life Application Study Bible in the NLT translation would be the way to go. In fact, I don't have a copy, but they also make a parallel study Bible. It's the only one I've ever seen that has the notes from both the NLT Study Bible and the Life Application Study Bible, which I don't have, but just pretend I'm holding it right here. Maybe I'll add it in with video editing. It has the notes for both of them in side-by-side column format at the bottom of each page. So that's something to be aware of, and if you want something not maybe to carry around everywhere, but to sit on the shelf, and you don't want to buy NLT and a Life Application Bible, then that would be the way to go. The one drawback, so if you get the 2008 edition, which is an excellent, I've used this, it is a really good study Bible. I borrowed this one for this review. If you get this one, just know that there's going to be about 80 to 100 less pages, and there's not going to be any color. Now, the good thing about no color is that the pages are a little more smooth. They feel a little firmer. They're not semi-gloss, but they have a glossier feel than color pages in Study Bible. These, because they're full color, I guess because of the printing process, the pages are a little thinner, and they kind of have that like chalky feel on your hands that the Cultural Background Study Bible has, for instance. You don't get that in the black and white print-only edition. So just note, this would make for an excellent general study Bible, primary study Bible even. They're not small. So get a backpack or satchel or something if you want to carry this one around. Aside from the size being a little big, this is an excellent study Bible, and I do highly, highly recommend it. So those are my thoughts. Tell me yours. Do you like the NLT? Do you like the translation? Have you used it? Leave your comments in the comment section below. I'd love to hear what you think about it. If you enjoy these reviews, again, like, subscribe, hit the bell to be notified of new ones. And if you haven't checked out Superhero Seminary or Bible for the Rest of Us or some of our other playlists here at the Disciple Dojo YouTube channel, go ahead and click through and check those out. There's going to be a link right at the end of this video, and you can see some of the other stuff that we offer here at the teaching ministry of Disciple Dojo.